Janet Arvizio. The next witness was Janet Arvizio. Janet is the wife of Jay Jackson and also the mother of Gavin Arvizio, Star Arvizio and Davelin Arvizio. She indicated that she met Michael Jackson in August 2000 and the meeting was related to Gavin's illness with cancer. She indicated that Gavin at one point during his cancer recovery was staying at her parents' place, Gavin's grandparents' home, in El Monte, California, because he needed to have a sterile bedroom free of germs. That's why Gavin was staying with his grandparents and the other Arvizios were living at the Soto Street address. She indicated that Gavin missed a year's worth of school because of his cancer. I think because of that, in earlier testimony it was shown Gavin and Star were actually in the same grade in school because of this year that Gavin missed because of his illness. Janet didn't visit with Michael Jackson again, apparently, until December 2002. She had met him in 2000 and then didn't visit him or Neverland Ranch again until 2002. In September 2002 Gavin participated in the Bashir documentary, and this was without Janet's knowledge. She apparently had been to Neverland Ranch, but then she left the ranch and the kids stayed there and became a part of the documentary that was produced in September 2002. The documentary wasn't actually aired until February 2003. That would be February 3, 2003 in Europe and February 6, 2003 the United States. In early February 2003 Janet received a call from Michael Jackson saying that there had been death threats on the Arvizio family and that Gavin was to come to Miami for a press conference where Michael could, in that way, protect Gavin. Michael didn't want Janet to really come to Miami, he just wanted Gavin to come, but Janet insisted on traveling with Gavin and that the other family members also travel to Miami. In the end they all did go to Miami, but they went there on Chris Tucker's private jet. Michael explained that the children were in danger and nobody, the jury that is, at this point is exactly sure what danger was being discussed or what real or imagined danger there could be. But Michael Jackson and those around him were expressing a concern to the Arvizios that they were in some type of danger and that Michael could protect them. Michael explained this to Janet and, I think, he explained it over the phone or maybe, no, I think that he actually explained it to her after they got to Miami and spent about 45 minutes or so detailing what his concerns were without actually explaining the danger. But as a result of this little meeting with Michael, Janet felt that he was really a great guy to have all this concern. Michael Jackson had told her that Dieter and Ronald will fix the problem. What problem there was I'm not sure, I think it was just the fallout from the Bashir documentary, but there was never any indication of, what kind of danger the Arvizios could possibly be in. It could be, and this is just my opinion, that this concern about a danger, or people getting after them, could have just been a made-up story that was designed to frighten the Arvizios into doing whatever Michael and his close associates would have them do. Michael also apparently talked with Gavin when they met in Miami and after a day or so, as they prepared to return to California, Michael Jackson took off his jacket and gave it to Gavin and told him to never take it off. Dieter and Ronald apparently sat down with Janet and started asking her all kinds of questions regarding personal information about her background and her life and a lot of other things that didn't really seem important to Janet at the time. She wasn't really told what was going on, so she volunteered whatever information Dieter and Ronald were looking for, because at that point she still trusted them. Michael had actually told her to trust Dieter at one point. Dieter had Janet sign some documents that apparently would keep her kids from being killed. Dieter apparently, and Ronald too for that matter, but Dieter in particular, seemed to be a very threatening kind of person. As time went on Janet had less and less respect for either one of those two particular individuals which she described as being the Germans. They were of German descent and at times she said they did speak to one another in German. Now whether that was to keep her from understanding what they were saying, who knows. But anyway, she unknowingly signed this document and she said it was a blank document. The prosecution presented the document during the testimony today and entered it into evidence and showed it to the jury. It actually shows Janet Arvizio's signature in two places. She had said she signed in only one place, but it didn't have a line under it as it was shown to the jury. Nor did she sign it more than once, but the paper clearly showed that there are two signatures on the document. Janet didn't know what she was signing and this is how people get sucked into things, I guess, without knowing what it's all about, but she did trust these people. She unknowingly signed this document that apparently authorized an attorney, an unknown attorney at this point, to represent her and the other Arvizios in some sort of legal action against somebody. I'm sure we're going to find out more about the document and what it was all about. But at this point all I know is that she signed something that she really didn't know what she was signing. She went to Neverland Ranch after she returned from Miami, but on the way back from Miami she described an incident that she observed on the plane. I've got to say, that if she's acting she did a pretty good acting job, but she got really upset, and what still bothers me about what she said is that if she was as upset as she appeared to be in the courtroom today, I just really don't understand why she didn't try to get hold of the police or get hold of the sheriff's department immediately when she returned to California. But anyway, on the plane she said that at one point in the flight after they'd been into the flight for a few hours, the flight from Miami to Los Angeles or Santa Barbara is like 5 hours at least. She said at one point she got up, I think, to go to the restroom and she noticed that everybody else on the plane was sleeping, including the flight attendant who was nodding off. On the way she passed by the area where Michael and her son Gavin were seated and she observed Michael licking the top of the Gavin's head and in kind of an embrace. She never indicated whether Michael saw her or anything else. I think that, well, I don't know, if he is sitting there licking the top of Gavin's head, and she walks by him in this small plane, I don't know how Michael Jackson could possibly be unaware that she had seen something. Maybe he did know and it just hasn't been presented yet, but at least in her testimony it wasn't indicated whether Michael actually saw her looking at him and Gavin. Maybe that'll be clarified, but she indicated that Gavin appeared to be asleep. While she was in tears and very distraught in the courtroom, she said that she couldn't believe what she was seeing and said she didn't know if she was dreaming or if anybody else had seen this. The unfortunate thing is that this was apparently such a shock to her that she didn't tell anybody about this incident until much later when her son star Arvizio mentioned some type of inappropriate activity that he had observed in Michael Jackson's bedroom. If this inappropriate activity had occurred in my presence, I would not have tolerated this to the point that she apparently did and just let it go without contacting the authorities or breaking off any and all relations with Michael Jackson. But I guess that's really what her testimony is all about. She felt confined or restrained or helpless or whatever, and this was part of the reason that she didn't say anything about this incident until much later. But anyway, she related what she observed. They arrived later that evening at Neverland Ranch and Janet indicated that she stayed in the guest house and that the boys stayed with Michael Jackson. She said that she stayed at Neverland Ranch and I'm not sure how long she stayed, maybe it was a day or less. But she felt very nervous about the situation and about the confrontations that she had with Dieter, Ronald, and the whole situation including the threats and the talk about the killers out there wanting to harm them. She was frightened to the point where she wanted to leave Neverland Ranch. Dieter and Ronald, on the other hand, were insisting that she stay at the ranch to make a rebuttal video to the one that Martin Bashir had produced. She was to do this because, by creating this rebuttal video praising Michael Jackson for the wonderful person that he was, this would appease the killers. This talk about killers and people out to get her really frightened her and she decided not to tolerate staying at Neverland Ranch. She went to Jesus Solis, who gave his testimony earlier, and she asked Jesus Solis to take her and the children back to her parents' house in El Monte. Jesus agreed to do this and later, as I learned, he got into trouble with Dieter, Ronald, Frank, Michael and everybody else for helping the Arvizios, but he did take them to her parents' house. I'm suspecting that at this point Michael Jackson, Frank, Ronald, Dieter and whoever else, were frantic because they needed to produce this rebuttal video as soon as possible so that they could do their damage controls, i.e., making Michael appear to be an all-round good guy. While the Arvizo children and Janet were away from the ranch, Frank kept calling her and he called her quite frequently, sometimes every 15 minutes, and continued to warn her about the killers. She was really getting pretty frightened at this point, and it appears fairly obvious to me that all of these threatening phone calls and everything else was their way of getting Janet to bring the children back to Neverland Ranch to make this rebuttal video. She said that while she was at her parents' house that her parents had been contacted by various reporters and she had all kinds of offers for stories and all kinds of things that her parents showed to her, and she indicated that at least one of the offers was for $100,000 cash for information about Gavin's relationship with Michael Jackson, but she said that she refused this offer and all of the other offers. She had received several phone calls from Frank, and at this point the prosecutor played a taped phone conversation that Janet claims is a composite of several telephone conversations, but they were all from Frank, and this particular audio tape was played previously for the grand jury and it was played today for this jury. The taped phone call, or calls, lasted for, I would guess, probably about 20 minutes or so. Throughout the phone call Frank was continually telling Janet how much he cared for her and that Michael cared for her, and Janet was repeating a lot of the same kind of information about how she really liked Frank and that he had been very kind to her. But she did not like the Germans, i.e. Dieter and Ronald. Frank promised her that even if Dieter and Ronald were at the ranch she wouldn't ever have to talk to them again. In fact, later on in her testimony, she actually said that Frank had told her that Dieter and Ronald had been fired. But none of that was mentioned on this audio tape that the jury listened to. We listened to the taped phone calls and Frank was pleading with Janet to return to Neverland Ranch to talk to Michael Jackson, and I think he actually mentioned that he wanted them to return to the ranch to make this rebuttal video and say nice things about Michael Jackson. She believed Frank and agreed to return to the ranch to do the rebuttal video. Apparently, Dieter and Ronald had interviewed David Arvizio, and David Arvizio was saying something that may or may not have been true. It was never revealed what he was actually saying. Maybe he was trying to take advantage of a financial opportunity and was cooperating with Dieter and Ronald. It's not really known at this point what kind of input David may have had in all this. Janet, before she went back to the ranch, said that she had gathered up some documents, restraining orders and that kind of thing against David to show Frank that David was not a trustworthy person to be talking to. She agreed to talk to Brad Miller. Brad Miller was a private investigator for Michael Jackson, and because Frank had told her that if she spoke to Brad Miller and said nice things about Michael, then this would appease the killers. He kept referring to the killers, and it's unknown whether this was an idle threat to her or whether. I still think that all of this reference to killers, or people wanting to do harm, was just an effort to create this feeling of fear among the Arvizios to get them to cooperate with whatever Michael Jackson's associates wanted them to do. When she got back to Neverland Ranch after being requested to return by Frank, she immediately saw the two Germans, and at that point she knew that Frank had lied to her to get her back to the ranch. She stayed, I guess, in the guest house, and the kids went and had some sort of conversation with Michael Jackson in his office. I don't know at this point whether the kids were to stay with Michael or whether they were to stay in the guest house. I don't think that was ever made clear. She tried to get Jesus Solis to cooperate with her again to take her off the ranch because she didn't feel safe there. She knew something was going on. Now, if I didn't feel safe about something, and this is my opinion, I would probably want to try and do whatever was necessary to take my kids with me and make sure they were safe. She wanted to get out of there, and so she went to Jesus Solis, and Jesus simply told her that he could not help her at all, that he had gotten in trouble because of what he did the last time, and that she would have to find some other way. She eventually left Neverland Ranch, without her kids, and went to Jay Jackson's apartment. Now I think the way that she got to Jay Jackson's apartment was by convincing Chris Carter, who worked for Michael Jackson as a security person, that she needed to get off of the ranch, and he took her to Jay Jackson's apartment. She then, I believe, got some phone calls again from Frank. Frank said that she and the children would have to go to Brazil. What the purpose of the trip to Brazil was is still not clear my mind, but I think it was to maybe keep the Arvizios away from any kind of publicity, or maybe keep them from getting any other kind of financial gain or anything from this whole Bashir documentary fiasco. She was being told by Frank that she and the children would go to Brazil with no specified date of return, except that they could possibly return when everything related to Michael Jackson was under control and that all the damage control had been taken care of. Janet got word that the Department of Child and Family Services wanted to talk to her, and it was never clear whether this was because the children were missing school or because of the fact that they had seen the Bashir documentary and that they wanted to clear up whatever was going on with Gavin and Michael Jackson. Anyway, they wanted to talk to her, and she began to think that this was a good way to tell them what was happening, and that by doing that she would be able to get her kids back that were being held at Neverland Ranch. She fully intended to talk to the Department of Child and Family Services by herself and explain it. But the Department of Child and Family Services wanted to have the children present when the interview took place. So Janet got on the phone and spoke with Frank and said that she needed to have the children present for this interview with the Department of Child and Family Services. Well, Frank said that she would have to do the rebuttal video that they had in mind first, and then she could go with the children to this meeting with the DCFS at Jay Jackson's apartment. Okay. So this kind of explains why Janet and the kids were doing this late night early morning rebuttal video prior to going to this meeting with the DCFS the very same morning. What I don't understand, at this point, is how this rebuttal video, that was produced that night in the early morning hours, was never actually made a part of the final rebuttal video that was presented on the Maury Povich show. That has never totally been revealed yet, but it has been suggested that maybe they just clearly ran out of time and that there was no time to get that part of the interview with the children spliced into the rebuttal video that was actually going to be aired. Frank had told Janet, and this goes toward explaining why Janet and the kids and everybody else said what they did on their portion of the rebuttal video. He told them that if she and the kids did a good job on the rebuttal video, that they would not need to go to Brazil. This ended the testimony for the day, which was all testimony taken by the prosecution. Tomorrow the prosecutor will continue his examination of this witness, and it will be interesting to see what new kind of twist, if any, comes about as a result of the cross-examination by the defense. Janet Arvizio was in many ways her own worst witness. I'll try to explain my reasoning, but first I would like to say that I chose not to characterize Janet's behavior or physical appearance in my daily audio recordings. I chose instead to try and be more objective by just concentrating on what she was trying to say in her testimony. Having said that, I can now mention some of the things that I heard and observed that did have an impact on her testimony. When she was finally called as a witness, she entered the courtroom wearing what appeared to be a brown hoodie sweatshirt. I was later informed that it was actually a blue hoodie, but the courtroom lighting may have made it appear to be brown to me. As she made her way from the back of the courtroom to the witness stand directly in front of the jury box, she was obviously trying to shield her face with the hoodie so that, I assume, Michael Jackson could not see her. As she took her seat in the witness box, I was shocked. She had no makeup on and was dressed very plainly. Quite frankly, she appeared as though she was a homeless person. If this was in any way an attempt to help gain sympathy from the jury, it did not work. Along with the other jurors, I had seen the Arvizio's rebuttal video earlier in the trial, and Janet appeared in that video to be a very nice-looking lady, nicely dressed and wearing makeup. Her children also appeared nicely dressed and groomed for the video. What a change. She looked nothing now as she did then. The jury was informed later in the trial that Janet had at most a 6th grade formal education and was not a sophisticated testifier. Whether this affected how she figured the jury would view her is unknown, but I would think that the prosecutor could have at least given her some friendly advice on how to dress and conduct herself as a witness. As she began answering questions, she exhibited some behavior that I know was annoying to some of the jurors and to one juror in particular. That juror's name was Ellie. When Janet was trying to make a point about something as she was responding to questions, she would turn toward the jury and snap her fingers. This gesture didn't score many points with Ellie, and to me it was a little unnerving. For some reason Janet felt she needed to interact with the jury in this way in order to get her point across. Unfortunately for Janet, this attempt at interaction did not sit well with the jury. At one point in the questioning, Janet turned away from the attorney who was questioning her and looked directly at the jury and responded that she didn't think, because of this or that the attorney really knew what he was talking about. That direct engagement with the jury felt a little bit uncomfortable to me. There was another time when she tried to focus on her ethnic background and social status as a Hispanic person. She again turned to the jury and said, "You know how it is with our culture." This statement did not go over well with some jurors, and I know for a fact that one particular juror, Paul, who would eventually be selected as our jury foreman, was greatly offended by that statement. Another time she addressed the jury and prefaced a response to a question by saying, "Please don't judge me. I don't know why she said that because, obviously, that's exactly why we were there, to judge her." So Janet did not get off on the right foot with the jury, and her appearance and demeanor on the witness stand definitely did not help improve the credibility of her testimony. Janet Arvizio. The testimony from Janet Arvizio continued today under direct examination from the prosecution. Janet said that she went to Neverland Ranch after the Brad Miller interview, and she indicated that eventually she and the Arvizio children were separately taken and reunited at Hamid's residence for the taping of the Arvizio's portion of the rebuttal video on February 19 to 20, 2005. She said that everything that was presented by the Arvizios on that rebuttal video was scripted by Dieter and possibly Ronald at that time. She said she was just acting on the video and that she had put Gavin's head licking incident on the airplane out of her mind. She had done that, I guess, so that she could be a better actor on the rebuttal video. She said she did her own makeup for the rebuttal, but that Frank wanted her to add a little bit more makeup. Janet was asked to sign some releases at the request of Vinny and Frank. Now, what those releases were all about is not quite clear at this point, but I think they had something to do with the rebuttal video. Janet, at this point, was beginning to become a little suspicious about signing documents that she didn't know anything about, and in her words, "My signing days are over," and she refused to sign those releases. This may have had some bearing on why the Arvizio's portion of the rebuttal video was not presented as a part of the rebuttal that was shown on the Maury Povich show. But here again, that's just speculation on my part. It wasn't clear as to what significance that might have. She went to Jay Jackson's apartment for a meeting with the Department of Child and Family Services on the very same morning of February 20, 2003. The people that were presumably Michael Jackson's security people wanted Janet to tape record the meeting that she was going to have with the children and the representatives from the DCFS. She said that she was reluctant to do that, but then agreed to go ahead and turn on the tape recorder. For a good portion of the interview with the DCFS she did have the audio tape going, but at some point she decided that really wasn't the proper thing to do and she turned it off. The jury later found out that Michael Jackson's people had actually placed a second tape recorder in the room that, as of now, none of the jurors have heard. We did hear the tape that Janet had turned on and off. There was not a lot of information on that audio tape. The DCFS, according to Janet, didn't take any notes during their meeting and they met with just Janet and the children. But the DCFS was, according to Janet, extremely concerned about possibly being sued by Michael Jackson. So whether that was the primary purpose for the meeting, it is not really clear at this point, but at least Janet seemed to indicate that the DCFS was really more concerned about themselves than about the Arvizos. The Arvizo children went back to Neverland Ranch. Vinny, another one of Michael Jackson's associates, later expressed to Janet that she and the children had not done an adequate job on the rebuttal video. And therefore, they were going to have to leave the country. I think I mentioned earlier that Vinny, note, it may have actually been Frank, had promised them that if they did a good job on the video they may be able to stay in the country. Well, apparently they didn't do a good job, and it might have been due to something that was said on the video. Vinny is now telling Janet that she and the children need to leave the country. Michael Jackson's associates were telling Janet that if she and the family went to Brazil that they would provide her with a house and an apartment if she would agree to go. She was asked why she would need both the house and the apartment, and she replied that the idea was that if for some reason she was being followed or harassed in one location she could go and live in another location. Janet returned to Neverland Ranch and she and the children started preparing to leave the country. If she didn't agree to go to Brazil, according to Janet, Frank was threatening some harm to her parents, I guess. Janet said that she eventually went to Bill Dickerman, an attorney whom she met through Jamie Masada, as we learned earlier, to try getting her passport back from Vinny. The prosecution presented into evidence the 4 passports that were prepared and ready to go for Janet and the children to leave the country. Janet went from Neverland Ranch to a hotel in Calabasas on February 25, 2003, and she stayed there for approximately 5 days. The children were there also. She called many people from the hotel in Calabasas, but she never called the police. I think the reason for this is that she felt she was being watched, was frightened, and that's why she never called any of the authorities. She returned again to Neverland Ranch and stayed in her guest room from March 2 to March 10, 2003, and during this time the boys were staying with Michael Jackson in his room. Apparently, she had moved out of her apartment in East Los Angeles on Soto Street at the request of Michael Jackson's people. I think this was in preparation for her and the children to leave the country, and also was possibly an excuse for Michael Jackson's associates to make sure that she didn't have anything in her apartment that might be incriminating against Michael Jackson. She had at one time mentioned that she had letters from Michael to Gavin in her apartment and that she kept those letters in, I think, a vase of some kind, and she was just keeping them for sentimental reasons, I guess. Even though Michael Jackson's people wanted her to move out of the apartment, she decided at one point that she wasn't going to move. But Frank and Vinny wanted her to move, and they, in some manner, were able to terminate her lease and also move her possessions out of the apartment. Michael Jackson's people forged some documents to get her kids out of school, and the documents submitted to the school authorities said that the Arvizo children were being taken out of school to move to Phoenix. Now, in some cases I think the documents actually had Janet Arvizo's signature on them, but in other cases Vinny had just signed where the parent was supposed to sign, and, apparently, it was never questioned by the school authorities. The next item that was presented by the prosecution was the urine bottle incident, where Gavin was required by his doctor, occasionally, to have his urine checked because of his medical condition. Gavin had called Janet to say that Michael was concerned about Gavin having to go and take this test because the two of them had been drinking Jesus juice. Vinny, Gavin, and Janet traveled by car to Kaiser Hospital, I guess, to have this test done, and they had the urine sample with them. Janet asked Vinny stop along the way because she needed to use the restroom. She said that she went into the restroom, and when she came back she discovered that 90% of the urine sample had been lost or disposed of in some way. The 10% remaining in the urine bottle was apparently taken to Kaiser Hospital anyway, but it was never revealed in the testimony as to what the results were of that test. She indicated at one point she had an opportunity to go to a beauty parlor, and from there she called Jay Jackson. I think Janet went to this beauty parlor with Vinny, and Gavin was also along. The beauty parlor was within a short walking distance from Jay Jackson's place of employment. Janet had called him and wanted to know if he could pick her up at the beauty parlor when he was finished with his work for the day. So he came over, and Vinny was apparently surprised to see him there. In fact, according to Janet, he was red-faced because Jay Jackson showed up. I think Vinny placed a phone call to somebody, and whoever it was that he talked to said that it was okay for Janet to go with Jay Jackson, which she did, but Gavin and Vinny went back to Neverland Ranch. Janet indicated that she had a family court appointment on March 11, 2003, and that appointment was apparently to determine whether or not she was going to get full custody of the children from her ex-husband, David Arvizio. She told a lie, apparently to Michael Jackson and his associates, and said that the children also needed to be in family court on that day, which in reality, they really didn't need to be there, but this, according to Janet, was her plan for getting her children away from Neverland Ranch. Vinny agreed to bring the children back for the court session, but then, for some reason, he apparently didn't. Why he didn't, I don't think was ever revealed to the jury. Later, Janet pretended that her parents were ill so that the children could return from Neverland Ranch. Apparently, she was trying to play on the sympathy of Michael Jackson's people to get the children back together with her at her parents' house. Vinny did bring the children to Janet at Janet's parents' house in El Monte, but she said that Gavin was violently angry because he said that Michael loved him and he needed to go back to Neverland Ranch. Well, I think from this point on there was no future return to Neverland Ranch. Janet said that she was aware that she and the children were being stalked by Michael Jackson's people. She was living at Jay Jackson's at the time because the Soto Street apartment was empty and had been cleared out of all her possessions and moved into storage by Michael Jackson. So she was living with Jay Jackson at his apartment. She said that as far as her possessions were concerned from Soto Street, she got all of her possessions back eventually, except those items which were related to Michael Jackson. She specifically mentioned the vase where she had stored a bunch of letters between Gavin and Michael and that all of those materials were missing. She went to visit with attorney Larry Feldman at Bill Dickerman's recommendation, as we learned in previous testimony. At the time that she was visiting Larry Feldman and just prior to the time that Larry Feldman recommended she go and see Stan Katz, she thought that Gavin may have been drinking alcohol. She was concerned about that because Gavin only had one kidney. She said that she hadn't concluded that there was any sexual abuse or inappropriate behavior until after her discussions with the sheriff's department. She finally stated that she is not planning to file a civil lawsuit currently or anytime in the future against Michael Jackson. That ended her testimony for the day and she will continue on the witness stand tomorrow. Friday, April 15, 2005. The testimony of Janet Arvizio continued again today. She said that people were following her with video cameras, from February 14, 2003 at least through March 17, 2003. The videos were shown to the jury and the videos showed that her parents' place in El Monte was being monitored. There was a videotape showing Janet's mom and dad leaving the house and re-entering the house. Jay Jackson's activities were also being monitored. There was another segment of the surveillance video that showed Janet Arvizio talking with a representative of the Department of Child and Family Services and at that time she was with Vinny. There was another tape segment that showed Davelin coming home from school at her grandparents' house. And then finally there was a tape that lasted for between 5 and 10 minutes showing the dyno movers moving belongings out of the Soto Street apartment. It was Vinny who was identified as the videographer and he was videoing all nooks and crannies and corners of that apartment to show that it was empty. Apparently, and I can only guess at this point, someone had instructed him to go to that apartment and once everything was moved out of the apartment to make sure all the drawers were opened, all the cabinets were opened, and everything was videoed so somebody could look at that and determine that yes, in fact, everything had been moved out. This is only my conjecture at this point. That ended the direct examination of this witness. The cross-examination now started by the defense with Mr. Mesereau doing the cross-examination. Janet said that Chris had, I guess this was Chris Carter, the security person for Michael Jackson, had taken her to Los Olivos for a leg wax just prior to the time that Jesus had helped her leave the premises. Janet indicated that it was late in the afternoon that she had the leg wax and that it was 1 o'clock in the morning the next day that she had asked Jesus to help her and the children leave Neverland Ranch. It gets a little bit confusing here without going back and looking at a specific timeline as to when all these things occurred, because there was so much time spent leaving Neverland Ranch and returning to Neverland Ranch and it was repeated several times when several different events occurred. So that's going to have to be reviewed in detail later on by the jury during deliberations. There was a recorded phone conversation between Janet and Frank that the jury has already listened to a couple of days ago and the defense replayed that particular phone conversation and broke it down into small segments that Mr. Mesereau then used to ask Janet questions. The defense went over parts of the taped phone call in detail but I didn't feel it was necessary to write some of those things down. The defense did make a point that, during this conversation with Frank, Janet was still calling Michael Jackson family. Even after her so-called escapes from Neverland Ranch, Frank expressed concern about her safety. Now whether this was legitimate concern, the defense would lead you to believe that it was legitimate concern, but this is not certain at this point. The concern may have been that Janet Arvizio was going to sell her story about Gavin to the tabloids and that the concern was really for Michael Jackson and not for Janet and the kids, but he at least gave the appearance of being concerned. Janet mentioned several times that she appreciated what Frank was trying to do and said, family doesn't leave family behind. Frank at one point in the telephone conversation, which by the way Janet says is a composite of several telephone conversations, mentioned to her that he would like to have someone watch her house 24 hours a day. Janet never really answered the question yes or no, she just simply asked Frank for his cell phone number which he then gave to her. The defense is trying to make the point that all of this surveillance video and everything was really for the Arvizio's safety and that Janet had actually agreed to have Frank go ahead and set up this surveillance system. But Janet held pretty firm and said that she didn't commit to Frank one way or another, she just wanted his cell phone number. Now we get into the J.C. Penney case. Janet apparently filed for divorce from her ex-husband David approximately 5 days after the J.C. Penney case was settled. I might mention that the settlement in the case was for $152,000, but Janet Arvizio was pretty adamant in indicating that she never saw anything close to that amount. What she actually got in the settlement was $30,000, and I think that David got some part of the settlement. I think that one or two of the children got part of the settlement also because they were there apparently in the parking lot during this little escapade with the J.C. Penney security people. Janet presented her deposition in the J.C. Penney case on December 18, 2000, and in that case she indicated among other things that she had not been having any marital problems with her husband David and that he had never hit her or touched her or anything. Of course the defense was trying to make her testimony sound like Janet was trying to increase her chances of getting a big settlement from the J.C. Penney case, because, if she had said that David had hit her in any way there could have been some doubt as to whether she had actually received her bruises from the J.C. Penney security people or whether she had received them some other way. So the defense is trying to say that she, for convenience or whatever, has lied in depositions and testimonies that she's given before for whatever reason. When asked, Janet said that she is aware of the deadlines that she and the children are facing in order to file a civil lawsuit related to this current case, but she says that it doesn't make any difference whether she is aware of any deadlines or not because she is not going to sue Michael Jackson, and those are her words. In the J.C. Penney case again, she said that David never struck her. She indicated that she was attacked in the J.C. Penney parking lot and she was quite descriptive about what she said happened. She said that the person that knocked her down in the parking lot grabbed her breasts and squeezed her nipples between 10 and 25 times. What the defense was trying to do in this case was show that in order to get more money she would exaggerate what happened in the incident. She said that at one time, 15 years ago, she worked for approximately 1 year as a plainclothes security person for Vaughn's grocery store. That job entailed being on the lookout for people who might steal something from the grocery store. Anyway, the defense was trying to make some sort of connection between that and the fact that she has some kind of knowledge of what happens in the security business or whatever, I'm not quite sure. She testified that in the J.C. Penney case she was not interested in money, she just wanted an apology from J.C. Penney and also another company. Anyway, she indicated that she wasn't interested in money, but when the defense asked her if she had ever withdrawn her claim for money she said no. Janet had signed a document. I'm not exactly sure what this is all about, but it will probably be mentioned again during the redirect by the prosecution. Janet said that she signed a document saying that she had hired attorneys between January 2000 and December 2003 to investigate Michael Jackson. I believe she said that it was so the prosecutors in this case could actually do a background check on her. Now this needs to be clarified because the defense is trying to show that early in the year 2000 she was already starting to do some investigation on Michael Jackson. I'm sure we'll hear more about this. At this point the defense replayed the Arvizio rebuttal video. This is the third time that the jury has seen this rebuttal video, but it was stopped at several points so Janet could be asked questions about her part. She indicated, and this is pretty hard to accept, actually, you'd have to see the video to understand, but she says that the entire Arvizio rebuttal video was memorized. Maybe she doesn't understand exactly what memorized means, but to me that means word for word and was memorized from some script. She's already said that it was scripted, but to me the way she presented her comments in the Arvizio rebuttal it appeared to be far from scripted or memorized. I can believe that the people who were asking her to do this rebuttal video may have prepared some questions, but they didn't know exactly how she would answer the questions except for the fact that they had asked her to say nice things about Michael. But I don't believe in any way that this video was memorized material. She said that the children had also memorized what they said on the video. She indicated several different times that she was just acting. The defense asked her if she knew Andrew Lacey. She finally admitted that he was a friend of hers and he was a friend that was an LAPD police officer. The point that the defense was trying to make was that if she had felt that she was in any kind of danger or she was being held against her will while she was at Neverland Ranch she could have called her friend Andrew Lacey. She indicated that at the time these events were going on she didn't feel that it was appropriate for her to call him because he was recently married and she didn't feel it would be right for her to call. In my opinion, if she was really in trouble she would find some way to get in contact with some law enforcement officer no matter who it was. At this point, the defense was saying that she knew a lot of law enforcement people with not just the LAPD but also the Metropolitan Transit Authority in Los Angeles, and these were all people that she could have contacted if she wanted to. This was aside from the fact that she could have called 911 at any time. She admitted, when asked by the defense, that she has been in contact with Larry Feldman during the last 3 months. She originally met Larry Feldman in 2003, and I believe when Larry Feldman was interviewed he testified that Janet Arvizio still may have considered him as her attorney, but he was pretty adamant that he had not been her attorney for some time. In her testimony she was indicating that she's been in contact with Larry Feldman during the last 3 months. The defense attorney asked her if she had been receiving legal advice, and she said that she was confused about the difference between legal advice and help. The defense changed their question to mean help from Larry Feldman, and that was when she admitted that she has been in contact with him and apparently he has offered some kind of help during the last 3 months. Anyway, that ended the testimony for today, and the testimony of this witness will continue again on Monday under cross-examination by the defense. Monday, April 18, 2005. The following notes and comments on today's courtroom session will sometimes appear to be a little bit disjointed because a lot of the questions that were asked seemed to be questions that were just all over the board. So this will be a summary as best that I could recall. Janet Arvizio. The testimony continued today with the witness, Janet Arvizio, under cross-examination by the defense. Janet indicated that from January through April 2003, which is the primary focus of this particular trial, she was represented by her attorney Michael Manning. Michael Manning is a family law attorney and has dealt with all of the issues that involve Janet's ex-husband David Arvizio. He was a family law attorney for Janet from 2001 to 2004. On October 4, 2001, she testified in a court hearing, apparently, about her husband David and the physical abuse that she received. The defense tried to indicate in some way that Janet was an aggressive person also, because she admitted being photographed for some tabloid with a knife in her hand held above her head. It was a photograph that David took of her, but she indicated that the photo was entirely in jest and that there wasn't anything in particular meant by the photo as far as Janet's behavior being aggressive or otherwise. She said that it had never occurred to her that she was being investigated by a team of investigators hired by Michael Jackson. At the interview that he had with Janet, Brad Miller clearly identified himself as a private investigator working for Mark, whatever the attorney's name was, for Michael Jackson. She still insisted that it never occurred to her that she might be investigated by somebody hired by Michael Jackson. She agrees that the Brad Miller tape is accurate and the truth in every respect when she was talking about Michael being a wonderful person. But she also made it clear that she doesn't believe that's the case today and that she was being totally fooled by Michael and those around her. In the J.C. Penney deposition, she said that she filed for state disability insurance because she was claiming that she was sad about being a nobody. I'm not exactly sure what the defense attorney's objective was in bringing that out. But anyway, it's recorded nonetheless. In the J.C. Penney deposition, she didn't want anybody to think that it was because of David that she received bruises, or rather it was implied by the defense attorney that she didn't want anybody to know that those bruises may have come from David. If the bruises came from David and not during the encounter with the security guards, that would lessen her chances for a large monetary recovery. It was never proved by the defense that she was deliberately saying nice things about David in her deposition just solely to increase the monetary outcome of the incident. She said that she last saw Asja Pryor at the Department of Child and Family Services meeting that she was involved with on February 20, 2003. Asja Pryor was Chris Tucker's girlfriend at the time, but she indicated that since that time she hasn't spoken with Asja Pryor. In the year 2000, she said that Davlin was staying with Carol Lemire, on and off. It was during the year 2000 when Gavin was ill with cancer. Here again, I'm not sure what the defense attorney's point was in bringing this out, it's not entirely clear. It was just admitted by Janet that Davlin did stay with Carol Lemire. Carol Lemire was David Arvizio's girlfriend at the time, and I'm not clear right now as to whether she's still his girlfriend or whether they've been married or what. It probably doesn't make any difference. Janet revealed that she didn't ask where her children were staying during their first visit to Neverland Ranch. She stayed at the guest house, but the children, and I think Davlin, stayed in the guest house too, but the boys were apparently staying with Michael Jackson. But she indicated that she didn't know and didn't ask where the children. The following day when she saw the boys, she didn't even ask where they had spent the night. Now this, to me, seems a little bit strange that their mother wouldn't be concerned about them. I.e., where the boys were staying or what was going on, and that she wouldn't insist that they stay in the guest house with her. However, she did mention that she didn't think that it was anything other than boys staying with boys, and it hadn't occurred to her that they might be sleeping in the same bedroom with Michael. It was revealed that Gavin had a bank account set up for him in his name, I believe, in October or November 2000 at Washington Mutual Bank. This bank account was to deposit the funds from the various fundraisers that had been organized for Gavin. The money from those fundraisers would go into this account that he had. Plus Louise Palanker had written those two checks each for $10,000 to the Arvizios and they both went into that Washington Mutual account. Janet indicated that she was a signatory to that account so that she can get money out of it at any time that she wanted. She did indicate that she did draw out money and she thought that money, in some cases, had gone to pay off credit cards or had gone for food and for whatever David wanted. There was another incident where Janet apparently had an interview with some newspaper reporter. I'm not sure where the newspaper was located, but the reporter wanted to talk to her about Gavin's cancer, so Janet agreed to do the interview. Janet said that she was misquoted in the interview when the newspaper article came out and said that one of Gavin's medical procedures cost $12,000 when, in fact, it cost $1,200. Now she said that there was an error in the newspaper article and that they added a zero and it wasn't because of something that she said. I think the defense was trying to imply that, well, maybe she was trying to get higher donations or get people to sympathize with Gavin's situation and that somehow she would get some additional donations for Gavin's account. But that was never confirmed or made clear. She did indicate that the newspaper article was an error. She did note that the error occurred, but she said that David had told her that he was going to take care of the problem. Asja also at one time, apparently, and I don't know whether this was in 2000 or 2001 but somewhere, about that time, Asja wrote a check to Janet for $600 for Christmas gifts because Asja was going to go away for the holidays. She was going back to Georgia or someplace. She just wasn't going to have time to do any Christmas shopping for the Arvizio children. So she gave Janet a check for $600 and asked her to buy gifts for the children. Chris Tucker, who was Asja's boyfriend, also wired money into the Washington Mutual account in the amount of $2,000. It wasn't clear what the $2,000 was for or how it came about, but apparently it was because Chris Tucker wanted to help out the Arvizios because they were in need of cash and that money went into the Washington Mutual account. Janet indicated that David took the money and went to Las Vegas. There was a time, and again I think this was in 2000 or 2001 something like that, Chris Tucker also gave the Arvizios a car and this was an old car. It was never indicated what kind of car or how old, but it was apparently Asja's old car and Chris Tucker was buying her a Christmas gift of a new Mercedes and that the Arvizios could have her old car. So he gave them the car. Apparently, he gave Janet the keys to the car, and this must have been Christmas of 2000 because he had given Janet the keys to the car and she had the keys when she went on the trip to Miami. When she came back from Miami, the keys and a number of her other belongings along with some of the children's belongings were taken from them by Michael Jackson's people. So she didn't have the keys anymore. She never saw the car and never drove the car. She had a car given to her and her family that she never really had in her possession. She said that she allowed her children to return to Neverland Ranch several times after the alleged licking incident on the airplane. Here again the defense was trying to make the point that okay, if this was such a serious thing and Janet was as upset as she appeared to be in the courtroom about that incident, why would she allow her children to go back to Neverland Ranch and possibly be subjected to some of the same kind of treatment? I think Janet's answer, although she didn't really respond to this, was that she was afraid and particularly afraid for her parents whom she said had been threatened with some kind of bodily harm if she didn't fully cooperate with Michael Jackson's people. She mentioned that on the date of March 10, 2003 at 4 a.m. in the morning was when she knew that Gavin had been drinking alcohol. I need to go back and review to figure this all out, but apparently this March 10 date was the last escape that she had with the children from Neverland Ranch. This was when she first became aware that maybe Gavin had been drinking alcohol, but nothing at this point about Gavin being molested or anything of that nature. She had observed prior to this, of course, the incident that she described where Michael was licking the top of the Gavin's head on the airplane coming back from Miami. She said that when she was taken to Calabasas by Michael Jackson's people, she indicated that she did call Louise Palanker at that time and that she didn't call the police. I think that her response was that she thought that Louise Palanker would probably call the police. Well, as I know from Louise's prior testimony, she didn't call the police either. She called her attorney and that's how Bill Dickerman got involved. Janet indicated that she was trying, although she didn't tell the police about being held against her will or anything like that, she indicated that she was trying to leave clues when she talked to people on the phone that she knew or whenever she thought she had the opportunity to let somebody know that she was frightened and wanted somebody to do something. She said that she was trying to leave clues when people were stalking her and taping phone conversations, etc., and that her parents' lives were at risk. She never told Jay Jackson about anything that was going on about stalking, nor did she answer anything until she and the children had permanently left Neverland Ranch. The defense said, and she agreed that she was somehow involved in a lawsuit in England that she really didn't know anything about. Now she said she didn't know anything about it, but she'd been seeing an attorney, Bill Dickerman, who had written a number of letters. So even though she didn't think she knew anything about it, Bill Dickerman probably did. I think she was suing some British tabloid, or something, but I'm not completely sure about all of the details in that particular lawsuit. When she was asked about what she had said to the Department of Child and Family Services as far as Michael Jackson was concerned or as far as David Arvizio was concerned, she denied saying certain things to the DCFS. Now we've never heard, actually, what was said to the DCFS because we heard only that portion of the tape that she eventually turned off. So we never did hear all of the exchange of conversation about what she was telling the DCFS. But apparently the defense knows what was being said, and it was probably because there was another audio recording device somewhere in the room at that time, and Janet apparently was saying only good things about Michael and about her husband and everything else. When she was asked about that by the defense attorney, she denied saying those things to the DCFS. So I'm sure we're probably going to hear more about that as time goes on. The Department of Child and Family Services investigation was officially closed on March 11, 2003, and from that point on, according to Janet, any of the DCFS officials would simply say it's out of their hands and that she should contact her attorney. So I think the jury is probably going to hear more about the DCFS investigation and interview and everything else, possibly from the testimony from one or more of the three interviewers at that meeting on February 20, 2003. She appeared to be giving answers to the defense questions that would be to her best benefit. In other words, if the question was asked about this or that and it seemed like it would not be in her best interest to say yes, then she would say no. But this still remains to be seen. It was revealed that in Janet's original meeting with attorney Bill Dickerman, she never mentioned alcohol or molestation in that meeting. Anything involving alcohol or molestation didn't come up until she met with the sheriff's department several months after meeting with Bill Dickerman and other attorneys. She indicated at one point that she really avoided saying some things until she was certain that no one was following her. She told the DCFS that she was upset because there was no consent from her when the Bashir documentary was shown. I thought this was kind of interesting because she didn't mention anything about being upset about Michael's conduct or Gavin's conduct on the Bashir documentary. She was only upset because she didn't give her consent to anybody to show her family on that documentary. The defense then read a list of a number of people whom Janet said she doesn't know. Whether she really does know these persons or not may never be known, unless these people are asked to testify later on. The defense then read a list of what they described as the things that were given to Janet from Michael Jackson or Michael Jackson's people. I've noted those as being a list of the perks that she received. She indicated that yes, she had gotten some things but she had not gotten other things, and it was all kind of boring to me, actually. It appeared as though the defense was trying to avoid addressing the real issue of molestation and the issue of defending his client, Michael Jackson, against these charges. The defense has been concentrating very heavily on Janet's apparent desire to maximize her financial gains and said that is her main motivation in this case. But the defense is not doing a very good job in proving that there wasn't any kind of molestation going on, and this may be deliberate on their part. The defense doesn't really have to prove anything. It's the prosecution that needs to prove that these molestations actually took place. Janet said that she didn't begin staying regularly at Jay Jackson's apartment until her apartment was taken away from her in March 2003 when Michael Jackson's people moved her and her family out of the apartment in preparation for their trip to Brazil. She said that she first learned of Gavin's alleged molestation by Michael Jackson in September 2003 from the sheriff's department. This seems a little bit strange. Why wouldn't she have concluded something sooner than this based on the incident on the airplane and any other information that she was able to gather from other sources? The defense had no further questions and the prosecution started their redirect questioning of the witness. At this point in time, the prosecution, apparently, intended to reveal the whole story about the J.C. Penney case. They indicated that Gavin, when he was about 6 years old or so, had stolen clothing from J.C. Penney, and Janet stated that the motivation for this was to trick David into getting David to pay for these items at a later time. The items that were stolen were a couple of school uniforms and some other things. As a result of that particular incident, David was attacked in the parking lot by the security people for J.C. Penney, and apparently Tower Records had something to do with this also. But Janet at this time had not even been in J.C. Penney's, I guess. If I understand the story correctly, she had been there to actually complete her application for a job that she was trying to get as a security person for a nationally known sporting goods store. She came out to the parking lot, apparently, and saw David being attacked by these plainclothes security people, and she indicated that she immediately got involved by running up to these people and confronting them saying, "What's going on?" And she was immediately attacked and thrown to the ground. Eventually, she and David were both taken to jail and her parents were called somehow and the children wound up with the grandparents. As a result of this parking lot confrontation, Janet broke her wrist, Gavin broke his arm and Star had a concussion. There was some sort of a hearing and the incident was settled out of court. Or it may have actually gone to court and there was a judge's decision, I'm not clear about that. But in any event, Gavin's part of the settlement was $25,595. Star's settlement amount was $8,576. Janet's was $32,000 and David's was $5,000. The remainder of the $152,000 went for attorney fees and medical costs for their injuries. Janet again described the incident about the car that she received as a gift from Asja and she explained that she had never actually received the car. They had given her the car, but she had only gotten the keys and that those disappeared, as I mentioned earlier, after her trip to Miami. So tomorrow the testimony will continue with the same witness under redirect examination by the prosecution. Tuesday, April 19, 2005. Janet Arvizio. The prosecution continued to interview Janet Arvizio today in their redirect. Janet indicated that her first attorney dealing with this Michael Jackson case was Bill Dickerman. She also indicated that Jamie Masada had offered her money from an unknown benefactor, which she said that she refused. The defense never really followed up on this, so I think that it could be pretty well established that she didn't accept any money from any unknown benefactors. She also said that she was not aware that Michael Jackson was in Miami until he called her. At this point in the proceedings, the jury that is, viewed some additional surveillance tape. I believe this particular segment of the surveillance tape was of Jay Jackson's apartment and possibly some more footage of the Arvizio children leaving school. The defense in their re-cross-examination of Janet Arvizio reviewed in more detail the JCPenney incident. Janet indicated that the area in which this incident took place was a secluded area of a public parking lot at JCPenney. The defense was trying to make a point that it wasn't all that secluded, and he presented some evidence that indicated that David Arvizio was actually driving around the parking lot trying to find a parking place. So if you put that together with everything else, it sounds like, well, there were other cars in the parking lot and that this wasn't all that secluded after all. The incident occurred late in the afternoon and she indicated that during the whole ordeal she had no idea why she was beaten up. She and David were both handcuffed and taken to jail. The grandparents were called and they came and picked up both Gavin and Star. Janet did indicate that she hadn't seen anything that went on between David and the security guards, initially. She had been in Oshman's sporting goods store filling out or completing an employment application and sort of came upon the scene at the point where David was being attacked, or allegedly attacked, by the security guards. There was some descriptive detail of what went on. I think one of the security guards was a female and there were two male security guards. She indicated that she wanted the security guards arrested, or at least to apologize, for what they had done, but she had no intention of suing. Now I'm remembering that Janet Arvizio has already said that she has no intention of suing Michael Jackson at some later date. However, in this JCPenney case she did later sue JCPenney and Tower Records, but it wasn't until a year later when she went to a lawyer that she sued for damages. She indicated that she was signatory to the bank account that was opened for Gavin and she didn't know nor did she ever ask where the money was coming from that went into that account. It hasn't really been revealed to anyone in the courtroom or the jury about how much money was in, or actually passed through, that particular account that was set up for Gavin. But, she did say that the $10,000 check, or one of the $10,000 checks, that came from Louise Palanker was cashed through her parents' bank account and it was given to David. She said that David abused her for 16 years. She indicated after the JCPenney incident that she and the children went to 1 Hour Photo to have photos taken of their bruises. Now I'm not exactly sure how this all happened, but she did have the photos taken at the request of an attorney in the JCPenney case. But it is my understanding that she didn't go to a lawyer in that case until a year later and at that time, of course, you wouldn't have any bruises that were the result of the security guard incident. She said that she went to 1 Hour Photo and had photographs of the bruises taken and those were shown in court. They did indicate that she was pretty well bruised up. I don't remember whether a picture of Star was shown, I don't believe so. I think there was a picture taken of Gavin though with his arm in a sling. I guess he broke a bone in his elbow, or something, during that security guard encounter. She indicated that she wasn't aware that Gavin had attempted several times to contact various celebrities. This concluded Janet Arvizio's testimony.